Day that ends in the letter Y. It is another scandal day engulfing Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. But it's also an embarrassment, not only for the nation that the military serves, but for the men and women in it, and for its commander-in-chief, frankly. Donald Trump, when it calls into question just how much more embarrassment Donald Trump is going to tolerate from his hand-picked, bipartisanly opposed Secretary of Defense.
I served in the Marine Corps. We are trained to be war fighters, not for crowd control. You're an embarrassment to this country. You're unfit to lead. And there's been bipartisan members of Congress that have called for your resignation. You should just get the hell out and let somebody competently lead this department.
I served in the Marine Corps. That was the very first point Representative Salud Carbajal made as he took his seat across from Pete Hegseth. He wasn't saying it to impress the room or to showcase his credentials. He said it to establish the perspective behind what was about to follow. Without that context, his remarks could have been brushed aside as nothing more than partisan criticism. Instead, the moment carried a different weight. A former Marine was confronting the civilian now responsible for leading every Marine in the nation. The contrast could hardly have been sharper. One gained his authority through military service under real-world pressure. The other rose to the position after building a career in television.
Let me be perfectly clear. You are not an army of one. And you are certainly not an army of woke. You are an American army, an army of warriors.
Hegseth sits at the head of the table, occupying the most powerful seat in the room. This is the same man who spent years criticizing generals as weak and accusing politicians of lacking backbone. Yet with every passing moment, he seems to shrink under the scrutiny. Everyone in the room can sense the change. What started as a routine hearing has become a real-time test of how little substance remains once the easy questions disappear. Carbajal never raises his voice because he doesn't have to. His calm approach says more than shouting ever could. It's obvious he isn't addressing an equal. He's confronting someone he believes never should have been entrusted with the nation's military, its nuclear arsenal, and the Pentagon itself. As for Hegseth, there is little to project. No commanding presence, no sense of authority, only the uneasy silence of a man discovering that a carefully crafted tough guy image falls apart when facing someone who has actually experienced combat. And what follows next is even more damaging, much worse. The kind of revelations that leave you questioning how he was ever considered qualified to walk through the Pentagon's doors in the first place.
I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It shouldn't come as no surprise that I have serious concerns with both the deployment of the National Guard and the Marines to Los Angeles. I served in the Marine Corps. We are trained to be war fighters, not for crowd control. Everyone here should be alarmed that the president has sent armed forces into a city against the wishes of a governor and mayor. I am concerned this administration is purposely escalating the situation with this step and politicizing our armed forces in the process. Let's call it for what it is. It's political theater. Hegseth, are the Marines in Los Angeles ordered to protect property by any means necessary?
Sir, I would say the ICE officers and police officers being attacked is not political theater. The National Guard and Marines,
just yes or no. Just yes or no.
The National Guard and Marines have the full authority to protect federal ICE agents.
Yes or no. Can you just say yes or no? This isn't Fox anymore. Just yes or no.
They're there to protect federal agents and federal.
Another BS answer.
This is what happens when the world's most powerful military is placed under the leadership of someone who still believes every challenge can be handled with a cable news speech. More than 700 Marines, along with thousands of National Guard troops, were deployed to Los Angeles despite the clear objections of both the governor and the mayor. It wasn't because the city was facing an active siege. It was because people inside the White House appeared to believe that armed service members on city streets would resonate with their political base. Troops trained for combat missions and to defeat enemy forces were instead assigned to stand outside federal buildings as a visible show of force. The operation ultimately cost more than $134 million. Thousands of service members were diverted from legitimate missions while California entered the height of wildfire season, leaving much of its National Guard occupied by what critics viewed as political theater. Meanwhile, the man overseeing it all, the same person who once criticized generals for being woke, could not provide a straightforward yes or no answer when asked what authority those Marines actually had. Instead, he sidestepped the question and shifted into a Fox-style argument centered on attacks against ICE. The former television personality who built his reputation on projecting strength suddenly appeared to be repeating someone else's script, realizing in real time that there was no teleprompter and no audience ready to applaud. Once the political value of the deployment faded, the Pentagon quietly brought the troops home, and that was only the start of the fallout.
Under the SRUF, the use of force, are Marines allowed to fire warning shots?
No.
Now that's more like it. Isn't that easy? Well, I'm going to beat this drum because you refuse to take responsibility. Will you take responsibility for having made a mistake? Not to mention, many people would say break the law in participating in the Signal group chat that included a journalist, your wife, your brother, where classified information was shared.
Sir, every way I communicate is authorized.
Okay, if you want to say that. I have called for your resignation. I didn't think you were qualified before your confirmation, and you have done nothing to inspire confidence in your ability to lead competently. You broke the law in sharing classified information, and in doing so, endangered the lives of our service members that you are responsible for. Your inability to hold yourself accountable makes you incapable to lead. This alone makes you unfit to be the Secretary of Defense.
This is the issue Carbajal is pointing to, and it's far more significant than many people realize. It isn't just about a single Signal group chat. There were two separate incidents. The first came to light in March, when reports revealed that Hegseth had shared real-time operational details about a planned strike against Houthi targets in Yemen. The messages included precise launch schedules for fighter aircraft, drone operations, and other mission information in a Signal group chat that accidentally included a journalist from The Atlantic. National security experts from both political parties argued that the information was inherently classified. Then, only weeks later, another Signal chat was uncovered. This one included Hegseth's wife, his brother, and his personal attorney, and once again he shared sensitive operational details related to the same military strike. But the story didn't stop there. In December, the Pentagon's independent watchdog, the Inspector General, released its findings, and the conclusions were severe. According to the report, Hegseth's Signal messages violated Defense Department regulations and may have placed American service members at risk.
Brings us to today, almost a full circle moment for Pete Hegseth and the Trump White House. The initial massive scandal, which embarrassed the country and Donald Trump and his national security team, Signalgate. It was a massive national security breach. It was made possible entirely by the sloppy and haphazard nature of Donald Trump's national security team when they shared national security information, including war plans. And then former National Security Advisor Michael Waltz accidentally added Jeffrey Goldberg, a journalist from The Atlantic, to that group chat on Signal. A damning new report is being released from the Pentagon's Inspector General. That is the top watchdog at the building that Hegseth is in charge of running. That report says that Pete Hegseth shared information in that Signal chat, information that put mission operations and servicemen and women at risk about a pending military operation in Yemen that took place in March of this year. The Defense Department's Inspector General finds that while the mission ultimately was not jeopardized, Pete Hegseth violated his department's own policies when he used Signal, a commercial messaging app that is not approved for sharing classified information.
A United States senator serving on the Armed Services Committee described it in nearly identical terms, saying the information effectively told America's adversaries exactly when and where to watch for U.S. aircraft during an active military operation. Lawmakers from both political parties, not only Democrats, have argued that Hegseth should never have been confirmed for the position. Investigators from within his own administration also confirmed that he declined to participate in an interview during the federal inquiry. So when Carbajal states, "You broke the law," he isn't using dramatic language for effect. He's referring to an active federal investigation involving a sitting Secretary of Defense. And the response, "Every way I communicate is authorized," isn't really a defense. If anything, it sounds more like an admission disguised as a dismissal. A former weekend television host who built his reputation criticizing supposedly weak generals had now been accused of putting American pilots at risk simply because he chose to exchange sensitive information on his personal phone, like someone organizing a weekend get-together. The same person who demanded strength and accountability from everyone else had little more than confidence and bravado left once the questioning became serious. Then the hearing reached its most personal moment, as Hegseth was finally confronted with the one question many Americans believe deserves a direct answer.
A United States Senator on the Armed Services Committee described it, almost word for word, as information that told the enemy exactly when and where to look for American aircraft in the middle of a live operation. Senators from both parties, not just Democrats, have said Hegseth should never have been confirmed in the first place, and members of his own administration's investigative body confirmed that he refused to sit for an interview during that probe. So when Carbajal says "you broke the law," he's not exaggerating for effect. He's citing an active federal investigation into a sitting Secretary of Defense. And "every way I communicate is authorized" is not a defense, it's an admission dressed up as a shrug. A former weekend television host who once spent his mornings screaming about soft generals had just casually risked the lives of American pilots because he preferred texting on his personal phone like a college kid planning a party. The same man who demanded toughness from everyone else offered nothing but empty swagger when the questions finally got hard. Now here comes the part of the hearing where things get personal, and where Hegseth finally gets asked the one question every American deserves an answer to.
Secretary, do you think the United States should continue supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia, a nation that is hostile towards the United States?
Well, as you know, sir, President Trump is committed to peace.
No, I just want yes or no answers. Today,
the United States has spent billions of dollars.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
Over years.
Just yes or no. Can I get a yes or no out of you?
We continue to send.
Come on.
Presidential drawdown.
It's that easy. Kindergartners can give me a yes or no. Yes or no.
Yes, we support peace in Ukraine.
Come on. Is this really leadership? You're an embarrassment to the United States. If Russia invades NATO allies, are you going to recommend to the president that we fulfill our Article 5 obligations?
Well, Russia has not invaded NATO allies.
No.
President Trump has invigorated the NATO alliance.
I reclaim my time. Yes or no? It's that simple.
There's Article 5 in NATO, which we recognize.
So is the answer yes or no?
That's what Article 5 is, yes.
Good. I'm glad you brought yourself to saying yes. Do you think political allegiance to Trump is a requirement for serving our nation, either in uniform or a civilian in the department?
I'm incredibly proud, as are millions of Americans.
No. Not today, Hegseth. Yes or no?
Congressman, you know what a silly question that is.
But it's silly enough to warrant a very straightforward answer. Yes or no?
We all support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
You know what? I'm not going to waste my time anymore. You're not worthy of my attention or my questions. You're an embarrassment to this country. You're unfit to lead. And there's been bipartisan members of Congress that have called for your resignation. You should just get the hell out and let somebody competently lead this department.
Mr. Chairman, do we not have any decorum in here?
Thank you very much. I yield my time.
Gentleman yields back, and I would urge everybody to remember and maintain a decorum suitable for this chamber with their further comments.
This hearing did more than reveal the weaknesses of one individual. It exposed a far deeper crack in America's system of civilian oversight of the military, a crack that will not disappear with a resignation or a carefully crafted public statement. What the nation witnessed that day was the predictable outcome of treating the Department of Defense as though it were another television production. When the person chosen to lead the world's largest and most powerful military organization is selected more for on-camera appeal than for institutional experience, the consequences extend well beyond a single uncomfortable hearing. They carry into every decision that follows, every command that is issued, and every service member whose life may depend on those decisions. The United States military is not a media platform. It is not a place where image can replace judgment or where branding can stand in for competence. It is an institution built on the expectation that those entrusted with its highest offices fully understand the responsibility that comes with such extraordinary authority. That expectation has been gradually weakened, and this hearing exposed that decline for everyone to see. A civilian defense leader who cannot clearly explain the limits of his own authority is not simply unprepared for the position. He becomes a risk to the very people expected to carry out his orders. Think about the message this sends to the men and women currently serving. Every officer who has written performance evaluations, every non-commissioned officer who has enforced military standards, and every junior enlisted service member who has faced consequences for missing formation or failing to maintain equipment now sees a Secretary of Defense acting as though accountability is optional. The double standard is impossible to ignore. It is unmistakable. And any institution that accepts one set of rules for some people and another for everyone else eventually loses the moral credibility needed to enforce standards at all. America's allies are watching the same hearing. Nations that have spent decades building trust with the United States now see a defense secretary who appears to treat treaty obligations as matters open to improvisation instead of firm commitments. America's adversaries are watching as well. They no longer need to manufacture propaganda when the Secretary of Defense provides the material himself. A military led by someone who seems more focused on projecting strength than exercising responsible leadership becomes a military that invites challenges. History repeatedly shows what can happen when powerful nations project uncertainty about the limits they are prepared to defend. The consequences are not theoretical. They affect real people. They affect the families who send their sons and daughters into uniform believing that civilian leaders understand the difference between a political photo opportunity and a genuine combat mission. They affect junior officers responsible for turning broad political direction into precise operational plans. They affect career military professionals who spent decades mastering their responsibilities, only to watch a former television personality dismiss their expertise with little more than a shrug and a rehearsed talking point. There is a reason the armed forces have traditionally been shielded from the constant cycle of partisan media. That separation exists to protect the institution from exactly the type of performance displayed during this hearing. Once that barrier begins to erode, and the Pentagon starts operating according to the same incentives that drive cable television, speed instead of precision, image instead of substance, loyalty instead of competence, the institution itself begins to change. That transformation rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually. A lowered expectation here, an unanswered evasion there, a quiet willingness to accept that some individuals are simply too politically valuable to be held to the same standards as everyone else. Over time, those small compromises accumulate. The result is an organization that may still appear powerful from the outside, but has lost the internal discipline that made its strength effective in the first place. That is the direction now becoming increasingly visible. The hearing did not create this trend. It simply exposed it under bright lights with cameras recording every moment. The response from much of the institutional establishment has been entirely predictable. Calls for civility, appeals to lower the temperature, polite reminders that everyone should remain respectful. Those responses reflect a system that places greater value on preserving the appearance of order than on demanding genuine accountability. Respect and decorum matter, but they do not matter more than the truth. And when the truth is that the civilian leader of the United States military cannot clearly demonstrate a basic understanding of the responsibilities entrusted to him, demands for decorum can begin to sound like demands for silence. In circumstances like these, silence becomes a form of complicity. The men and women who serve in uniform do not have the privilege of remaining silent. Those service members operate under standards that never change, based on television experience or political value. They are evaluated, corrected, and, when necessary, removed for mistakes far less serious than the ones displayed in that hearing room. The difference between the standards expected of them and those applied to the person leading the Department of Defense is now out in the open. That reality cannot be forgotten. It will influence recruiting. It will affect retention. It will shape the quiet decisions career officers make as they ask themselves whether the institution still deserves their dedication and best efforts. There is also a broader constitutional issue at stake. Civilian control of the military was never intended to be a blank check for any individual civilian leader. It is built on mutual responsibility. The armed forces accept civilian authority because civilian leaders are expected to exercise that authority with competence, restraint, and respect for the law. When that side of the agreement breaks down, the entire system comes under strain. The hearing made that strain impossible to ignore. It portrayed a civilian leader whose sense of accountability appeared tied more to the approval of a single elected official than to the wider framework of law, congressional oversight, and institutional responsibility. That is not the model of civilian control envisioned by the nation's founders. It is a far weaker and more fragile version of it. The path forward is not difficult to understand, even if putting it into practice will be challenging. The Department of Defense needs leadership that views the institution as something greater than the messaging priorities of any administration. It needs leaders who recognize that the confidence of the force is never granted automatically with a title. It must be earned through sound judgment demonstrated consistently under pressure. It needs people who can answer straightforward questions directly, instead of treating requests for clarity as personal attacks. It needs leaders who understand that the lives entrusted to their authority are not political props in a larger narrative. None of those expectations require perfection. They require seriousness. The hearing made it uncomfortably clear just how far the current situation has drifted from that standard. The decline did not begin on June 12th, and it will not disappear with the next news cycle. But the footage from that afternoon now stands as a permanent record of how much the standard has slipped. Americans who care about the strength of their military institutions should not turn away from that record. They should not accept the comforting belief that this was simply another heated partisan confrontation, and they should not allow calls for civility to erase the substance of what was revealed. That substance is both straightforward and deeply troubling. The individual currently entrusted with overseeing the defense of the United States has, under oath and before the cameras, demonstrated that he is not prepared for the responsibilities of the office. That conclusion is not extreme. It is a reasonable interpretation of the evidence presented during the hearing itself. The only question that remains is whether the country is willing to respond to what it has witnessed, or whether it will once again choose the easier path, hoping the consequences never become real. They will not remain hypothetical forever. Institutions that lower their own standards eventually discover that the outside world has noticed. America's adversaries notice. Its allies notice. And above all, the men and women asked to risk their lives notice. When they begin to believe that civilian leaders no longer treat those responsibilities with the seriousness they deserve, the institution starts to erode from the inside. That erosion is already underway. The hearings simply removed the last remaining excuses for pretending otherwise. The decision now belongs to the American people. The cameras have captured the events. The public record is complete. What comes next will determine whether the U.S. military remains an institution worthy of the trust it asks from those who serve, or continues its gradual shift toward becoming another stage for political performance. If you believe the United States deserves a Defense Department held to a higher standard than a television production, make your voice heard. Leave a comment. Share what you watched with others. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Those who benefit from silence are hoping people stay quiet. Don't give them that advantage.